Good afternoon. This is Peggy Kemp, the Executive Director for the Division for Early Childhood. We would love to welcome you to the Early Intervention, Early Childhood, Special Education, Personnel Preparation Standards, a First Look. Today, I'd like to just go over the agenda quickly so you know what to expect and talk a bit about how we will handle questions for today. First of all, we are so very excited that all of you have joined us. This is the second webinar that we have scheduled, and each of the webinars have filled to the max. So we are excited that this topic of standards for the Division for Early Childhood under CEC is something that the members are very interested in and invested in, as evidenced by some of the questions from the last webinar. And we know that all of you today are engaged as well, and we thank you for taking your time. Today we will talk about and share the current status of the ECSE Personnel Preparation Standards activity. We'll talk about why the Division for Early Childhood and the Council for Exceptional Children chose this direction and this time in DEC's history to move forward with the first ever set of standards. We would like to share with you some of the wonderful partnerships that have helped support the new standards, not only the first draft, but the entire initiative becoming a reality. Our partners at CEC and ECPC, the Early Childhood Personnel Center. Eva Horn will fill in some more details about each of those partners, as well as our task force members who have given significant time to the work. So what has happened so far is the first part of this webinar, and then Eva will go over the draft standards in a summary form. We hope that each of you has already or will access the draft set of standards immediately following the call or during the call. We hope that you then take some time with those standards to review them from your lens, your perspective, and there will be a survey link for each of you to provide feedback now on this first draft, and an assurance that there will be many opportunities for you, the field, to provide feedback to DEC and CEC about this set of standards and this important opportunity. So with that, Eva Horn, the chair of the task force, will move us through the remainder of the webinar. For questions, what we will ask is that you put all of your questions in the chat. We have 3 people monitoring the chat. If we can, we will answer your question during the webinar. Eva will continue the webinar as we answer those questions in the chat. But also at the very end of the webinar, when Eva is finished, there's some time to open up for additional questions or clarification on anything that we touched on while Eva was offering the information for the webinar. So to simplify it, please put your questions in the chat. We'll answer them while Eva is presenting if possible. If not, there'll be some additional time at the end of the webinar. So thank you very much for your time, and Eva will get us started.
Thank you, Peggy. Again, particularly, it really is a team that's putting this together, even though I'm going to be sharing the information today. It's an enormous team that's behind us, making sure that all the pieces get into place. So as Peggy said, again, I just want to add my so pleased that so many people are joining us or showing their interest in this work, and we hope share our excitement about what we're embarking upon here as an organization and as a profession. So as Peggy mentioned, I'm going to start off with some background information. I will go ahead and apologize to those of you that may have already heard some of this information. Hopefully there'll at least be some new tidbits in it, but we have shared some of this background information at multiple settings in which, particularly last fall with both DEC and the TED conference, making sure that as many of our collaborators and members of our field know that we're about this work and are providing us and supporting us through their ideas, both for ideas of support, but also their ideas about things that we may be missing. And that's the ear that I want you to listen to this to, or what are the things that that excite you, that you say, yes, that's exactly what we need and want. And what are some of the things that you say, I think maybe you forgot about, or oh, I'm not sure that that's right there. So that's the way I'd like for you to kind of listen to. I'm going to be doing a lot of talking at you, or actually talking through slides and giving you information. But again, we're really pleased that you're with us. So to give you a little bit of the background information, we'll start with what I would say is sort of the current status. At this point in time, as many of you know, particularly those in higher education that have been doing a lot of work getting programs approved and preparing our next generation of early childhood special educators, early interventionists, you know that we do not have actually standalone standard personnel standards. Our expectations, standards around the competencies, the skills and knowledge, the abilities that our EI, ECSE personnel leave our programs with, are prepared to engage in their careers, really sits underneath, if you will, the CEC standards for all special educators, you know, birth through grade 12. And we do have and have had an excellent set that DEC certainly has provided what we call the EI-ECSE specialty sets. And these are knowledge and skills. They are not standards. They are statements about additional or special or unique knowledge and skills that are needed by someone who is particularly focused on this birth through grade 3 or age 8 population. So that's kind of the current status that we're operating under, and the one that we are at this point working to, I wanted to say move away from, and I don't mean it quite as negatively as that sounds, but move forward from, if you will. It's our launching pad. So, so basically, why do we want to have a set of early intervention, early childhood, special education? And you're going to hear me repeat that very carefully, this EI, ECSE. It's been very important to the work group that we really are talking birth through grade 3 or birth through age 8. So it does include those folks working with our infants and toddlers, and our section 619 of IDEA Part B, as well as the primary years, kindergarten through grade 3. So we see these standards being a part of that full age range, and we want to make that very clear within as we identify, as we name, as we talk about this work that we're doing. So why do we want those? Well, there is definitely some things happening on the national landscape that have a real impact. The first one, which is not unique to early intervention and early childhood special education, is the fact that we need increased quantity. Shortages in special education, as well as early intervention, early childhood special education, actually, quite honestly, now even in general, what we call general education in we're actually seeing shortages within elementary education starting to pop up. So yes, that is an issue for us as well as other areas of education. Quality and quantity absolutely is an issue for us, and certainly has influenced this desire to have our own standards. probably even more strongly, and you may have already heard that a little bit in what I've been saying, is that we really do believe, and we continue to see through both research and information coming from the field, that those working in early intervention and early childhood special ed really do have a unique set of skills, need to have a unique set of skills, additional skills that go beyond what the K-12 special education personnel would need to have, and thus really sort of promotes the idea that rather than saying these are additional things that they need, these are the set of skills that make and define a high quality early intervention, early childhood special educator. Along with that, our sister organizations, if you will, those organizations that are part of the larger field of early childhood education, also are at this time engaged in multiple initiatives, many of which we are absolutely partnering with them. NAEYC, in its work on the power to the profession, which DEC is absolutely at the table, are working on revising and redefining what their early childhood personnel standards are. And their personnel standards focus on birth through grade 3. 0 to 3, the Infant Toddler Association has worked on, has a set of, and actually I just heard this weekend that they are also looking to do some additional revisions to what are the unique qualities that folks need to have working with infants and toddlers and their families. Theirs is birth to 3. Those initiatives by those two organizations really, again, laid out very clearly why we need to have a set of equivalent standards that look at children and families who are at risk or are experiencing developmental delays and disabilities. We need to have an equivalent set that can sit side by side at the same level, if you will, with NAEYC standards, personnel standards for that age group, and then 0 to 3's personnel standards to be informed by those things that we talk about in terms of the infant toddler population. And then lastly, many of you in higher ed have absolutely experienced this, the sort of ongoing difficulty that we have as higher education programs, as we try to sort of balance addressing the special education K-12 standards while at the same time really making sure that we're addressing and focusing on those unique qualities that ECSE folks need to have as we go about getting our programs recognized by CAPE and CEC. So yes, we need our own standalone standards. So how are we doing this work? What is happening with this idea of standalone standards? Well, DEC said, yes, we'll take the lead on that. And the work that we've done in terms of that is back in March, almost a year ago, March of 2018, DEC as an organization submitted a proposal to the CEC Professional Standards and Practice Committee, the PSPC, to, and the proposal was, in fact, to, that DEC would develop, of course, in partnership with CEC, would like to develop a set of ECSE standards that follow the CEC expectations and criteria for personnel standards, as well as the CAPE guidelines. That committee, CEC committee, the PSPC, approved that request and then forwarded on to the CEC board. And then in May, we were really thrilled how quickly this happened, what strong support we got from CEC at all levels. CEC staff as well as the CEC board of directors approved our request to do that. Then in July of 2018, CEC, as again, the organization, our parent organization, if you will, together with DEC, submitted a proposal to CAPE because we needed their approval in order to move forward. NAEYC, by the way, provided us with a really strong support letter for the idea of us having our own standalone standards. In September, then a few months later, CAPE provided us that approval and we were set to move forward. I want to take just a moment before I get into, so what have we done? What have we been doing? What is the work that's happened? I was going to say starting in September, and it actually started before that. I really did want to back up and make sure, even though Peggy mentioned it briefly, that we really have, and when I say we, DEC has such a wonderful support system to getting this work done. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of people time. Quite honestly, it does take some money as well to get this done. And we have these incredible partners without which this would not have happened. And we would not be where we even are today, much less looking to the future to get the rest of the work done. DEC's executive office has absolutely been instrumental in making this work. And that includes the full staff of DEC's office, executive office. The ECPC Center, the Early Childhood Personnel Center, is very much a partner in this. They have included in their work scope through their grant this activity as an important and critical component of what needs to happen in personnel development within early childhood special ed and early intervention. Their support right now at this moment is providing us consultants to help work with us in making sure that we do it right, so that we can get through the approval processes that we need to get done. And they are also providing travel support for our face-to-face meetings of the task force. No small thing, believe me. So it's been wonderful to have them as partners. Of course, anytime you talk about an early childhood personnel technical assistance center that is funded by the Office of Special Education Programs, that also means that we're working in partnership with the Office of Special Education Programs. Not only did they approve for ECPC to support this work, they have provided numerous opportunities or taken advantage of numerous opportunities to spread word about the work, to provide input into the work that we're doing, and in other ways ensure that the work is moving forward. And then finally, as I keep saying, our parent organization, the Council for Exceptional Children, and specifically the staff that works on the personal standards, works together with CAPE in order to be the professional organization that oversees standards for their specialty area. Council for Exceptional Children has provided us guidance, has provided us templates, has provided us lots of information in how one puts together a set of personnel standards, how one completes webinars, gets input from the field, and also they are allowing us to use allowing us to use their space in DC when we have our face-to-face meetings. So again, an important partner in this, and will continue to be as we move forward with completing the process, but then ultimately as we then begin using those standards as part of the program approval and recognition process. So when you have a chance, thank all those different folks. Okay, so then we did need to start getting done work, even though I said we got the approval, sort of the final piece of approval from CAPE in September of 2018. We did go ahead and get to work before that. We felt, given the kind of positive responses we were getting, we felt comfortable knowing that we would in some form be able to move forward on this task. So in May, the DEC Executive Office sent a call for task force applicants in the same way in which DEC now does lots of puts together a variety of different working groups and task force and committees to do the work of our organization. We were overwhelmed, at least I know I was, and I think all the other folks that were in the leadership positions around this were overwhelmed by the number of folks that wanted to be a part of this work. That was the good news, being overwhelmed. I would say that the difficult task then became, once we had the large number of applicants, was to think about how to select out of that large group 12 to 15 individuals that would become the task force. We needed to make sure that the task force was representation of the sort of the geography of the United States. We didn't want everybody to be, you know, in Kansas. We wanted folks to be from all across the US. We needed to have representation from educator personnel preparation programs that represented different kinds of institutions, different sizes of institutions, research intense universities, those that are more directly focused on personnel preparation, smaller universities, public universities, etc. We also wanted to make sure that we had individuals on the task force that represented the age range that we were dealing with. While we all are prepared to work from birth, or many of us are prepared to work from birth through age 8, the reality is we all tend to have our specializations, and we wanted to make sure that that the infants and toddlers were represented, that the primary K through 3 had representation in the preschool age group. We also wanted to have some folks on that had experience with standards, had experience with CAPE, had experience with reviewing programs for recognition and CAPE approval. Those souls who have done so much of this work for many, many years, we really needed those as well. And we also needed to have folks that had field experience. Were those educators in the field having early interventionist, early childhood special educators that had been down there in the, working together with kids and families, infants and toddlers and families and young children. So a lot of things we needed to address. And, bottom line, we just wanted some folks also on there that were just excited about this and saw that this was a great opportunity. And so from that large group, we selected a group of folks to begin this work with us. And I am, having now worked with these folks since July, I can tell you that this task force that we pulled together, 15 people, and I know that we could have found some other folks that could have filled these roles, but it is really a great group of folks that does represent different pieces of what we were just talking about, or what I was just sharing with you in terms of what we were looking for. Again, there were folks that we did not end up being able to accommodate within the small number that we needed to keep this as a working group. But we absolutely have sought those folks out for additional input and giving us extra help here and there as we're moving forward. The other piece that I wanted to real quick point out to you in terms of this particular slide are those support folks that we have. And again, I hinted at that when I was talking about our partnerships, but ECPC has provided us the incredible resource of having Margie Crutchfield, who many of you probably know, have heard about. Margie has had a long history of working both with CAPE, in CAPE before that, and working with CEC as a specialty organization around personnel standards. And then Vicki Staten, who is official role is as a liaison to ECPC. She is one of the co-principal directors on that Technical Assistance Center. But Vicki, again, the vast majority of you know Vicki, as she has been as long as I can remember, and that's been a long time, heavily involved in personnel preparation and personnel preparation standards within the field of early childhood special education and early intervention. So the two of them have really and continue to serve as consultants to us, and they're actually helping to answer your questions right now if they come up in the chat box. The DEC Executive Office, again, enormous support in terms of just organization, arranging, supporting us in getting this work done. And then, as I mentioned, of course, the CEC staff, particularly Megan Shea and Jennifer Bullock. Okay, so you got kind of our timeline in terms of the task force and how we got ourselves organized and moving on. But now let's look at the development of the standards itself. So today, item number 1, the first draft of the standards, and I would actually add standards and components because that's what's in the document that we're going to be asking you to provide us feedback on. The first draft of the standards and components is complete, is out. So we can say that's today, that's where we are today on the timeline. The standards draft, or the standards and components draft, is now open for public comment. The survey went live on January the 23rd when we did the first webinar, and it will stay open till February the 8th. So please hurry, get into the survey, give us information, give us feedback. The next step for us as a work group or as the task force is to incorporate those comments. We have a meeting scheduled for late February where we will begin incorporating that, your feedback, the feedback from the survey, into the current standards and components draft. We will continue to gather feedback throughout the winter. Oops, I skipped one, probably the most important one. We are also simultaneously, in fact, the work is happening right now by the task force and will continue through the spring. As I said, currently we have a set of standards and components. Each of the standards and their components, and actually each component under each standard, will have what's called supporting explanations, which provides additional information as to what do we mean by this? What do we mean by this for infants and toddlers? What do we mean by this as it pertains to preschoolers? What do we mean by this particular component as it applies to kindergarten through 3rd graders? So those supporting explanations are currently will be developed for every component under each standard. And those are being worked on right now by the task force and will continue to be worked on throughout the spring. You will have continued opportunities throughout the winter of 2019 and into fall, particularly when we're looking at conferences, different opportunities throughout winter and fall to continue to provide us feedback on both the standards, the components, but then also as those supporting explanations come out, giving us feedback on those. The draft standards then, the next round of draft standards will, or after we've incorporated your feedback, those draft standards and components will go to the PSPC, remember that's CEC's committee, for review in spring of 2019. We will also send a draft of the standards and components and the current draft of the supporting explanations to CAPE for review in the summer of 2019. So yeah, coming up fast. Then the actual full application to CAPE for their review and approval will go in July, on July 1, 2020. So as you can see, still time for lots of drafts, lots of revisions, lots of work, but we do have need to keep marching forward. Once the, and I'm going to say it as once because we're confident that that will happen. Once we receive CAPE approval, the new ECSE initial personnel standards will be available in 2021 to higher education programs to use for program review. They will become mandatory for, assuming we make timelines, mandatory for program review and approval in 2023. So that hopefully gives you a sense of what we're, the timelines that we're working under. So just a couple of pieces of information before we move into actually looking at the draft standards and components is to give you a little bit of a sense of the guidelines from which we were working on as a task force. I'm going to kind of jump around into the order on here. One, to make sure you're still listening to me, because I know having a talking PowerPoint's not exactly best practice in how to keep an audience engaged. So I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I actually have another reason for the jumping around, is that I'd like to put it in kind of a more logical order. So I'm going to actually start first with the last one, focus on children and families and creation of environments that will foster learning and development. That really is our overall charge here, is how do we ensure that personnel have standards that really focuses on supporting children and families and the creation of environments that will foster learning and development. That's our overall focus here. Then I'm going to jump up to the top one, that we needed to ensure that the work that we were doing reflects the recommendations of CEC's 2017 framing paper. What is that? Some of you may be asking. Well, CEC has put together a paper that lays out the beliefs that CEC has around the process of preparing personnel to work with children, youth, learners with at risk for or having established delays and disabilities. We needed to work within that, and I would say probably one of the most important things, while there's a lot of helpful information in that framing document, I would say that probably a couple of important pieces that are in that framing document are actually reflected here. And I would go to the second item here, which is that in fact, we reflect the current research trends in the field, that we are truly describing and making use of our knowledge base, including research, theory, practice-based wisdom, for what we're saying that makes for a high quality professional. Also, this framing document provided us guidance in understanding that, and I'm at the next to the last one on the list, that we reflect a global perspective. CEC reminds us that the standards are actually international. We are an international organization. We are not writing these standards only for programs in the United States. And so we needed to be careful as we talked about things that we hold near and dear here in the United States, that we talk about them not with our own unique terms, but we talk about how they reflect high quality practice wherever we are in the world. And then also in the framing document, we know that we need to, and this is the third from the bottom, avoid prescribing preparation, curriculum, or practice. And by that I mean, as those of you that have done prepared programs for review, the process of reviewing programs is not to say, here's your curriculum, canned curriculum, go and do it. The process is, these are the things that an individual that's going to be a high quality personnel needs to know how to do. And then you, the program, decides how you are going to ensure that they exit competent in those particular skills, knowledge, practices. And then finally, I think an important thing for us to remember that was important for us to remember as we were putting together the standards, and that I want each of you to, as you're reviewing the standards, to be sure to keep in mind, is the middle item, third one from the top, that what we are really doing here is we are describing what proficient candidates should know and be able to do as they complete their programs, and that we do that in alignment with CEC high leverage practices, and those speak to, in particular, that K through 3, K through 3rd grade, K through age 8, skills and knowledge, that we align with those, because that's what we are saying are the important practices that they should be doing. And of course, as DEC, we want those skills and knowledge, those things that they're able to do to align directly with DEC's recommended practices. So those were all things that guided our work as we began to embark on defining what we saw. But we also had another set of, in some ways, I think at times it felt like a constraint. But again, I think a very important piece of the work of developing standards. And again, both Vicki and Margie were invaluable to us in helping us to stay within this set, this particular set of guidelines that we needed to adhere to. So first, and again, you'll see this as you look at our draft standards and components, we can only have, according to CAPE, 7 standards, and we have 7 standards. It was a point in time we only had 6, but we do now have 7 standards. So that's the maximum that we can have. We also can have a maximum of 28 components. Those components need to be able to be assessed so that I, as a higher education faculty member, can look at that component and say, yeah, I can figure out how I can assess whether my pre-service, my candidates actually have achieved competence in that particular item. So only 28. We actually currently have 26, so we have a few to play with if we need to. And again, that's 28 across the 7 standards. So some of our standards have 3, some of our standards have 5, but again, we can't have more than a total of 28. So that was definitely in the back of our mind as we were doing this. These standards and particularly as you look at the components, we need to really make sure that we keep in mind how a program in higher education is going to use these standards. A program is going to need to develop assessments that show that their candidates have achieved these competencies, these standards, and they can only use 6 to 8 assessments. So if we get way too detailed in terms of what they need to be assessing, we're going to be really tying the hands of those programs. So that had to be in the back of our minds. The next one probably was in many ways the easiest guideline to be able to stay in line with, and that is that we did need to make sure that our standards, they did not have to be named this way, but that each of the four principles in the InTask standards were represented across our set of standards, and you see the 4 of them listed there. And then finally, we did need to ensure that CAPE has identified 2 themes that need to cut across our standards. They're not saying you have to have a standalone standard, but that they should, in fact, they really want you to have them shown, infused, embedded, clearly articulated across standards. The theme of technology, appropriate use and implementation of technology, and diversity and equity. So now on to the initial standards. So I'm going to give you just a little bit more things to think about before we actually look at the draft standards. And I just realized that there's 2 corrections, and this is the second time I've done this webinar and I didn't catch it. 2 corrections on this particular slide. First of all, it should say EI/ECSE draft initial standards, and it also should say and components, because we really are asking you to look at both the standard statement as well as the components. So we have absolutely focused, and again, much of this came from CEC's framing document. The task force has focused on performance-based behaviors rather than understand and know, really performance. Can you do it? Can you actually do these behaviors? So our focus is on that, focused on behaviors we want to see from beginning early interventionist and early childhood special educators, birth through age 8. And once again, I emphasize that we are looking at birth through age 8. We worked within the CEC framing document guidelines and the CAPE parameters to develop concise yet complete document. At least that's what we believe we've been able to do. But I also want to reinforce that a draft is just a draft. And yes, this is a draft. It is not the only draft that we will have, but it is a draft. And we will continue, we are obviously asking for feedback, and we will continue to ask for feedback to do that iterative process that we all know is so important to continually refine to make sure that we get it right. And again, I want to highlight that this time you're getting the standards and the components. What follows immediately thereafter will be the supporting explanations. And there are also additional documents that will be completed, but what will come up most quickly are the supporting explanations. And again, as you're doing your review and providing us your input on the survey, if you can provide us ideas around what supporting explanations might help clarify a component, or something that might be missing within a component, sometimes that might fit really nicely in the supporting explanation. So if you have those ideas, give them to us. We are definitely very interested in getting your ideas. I think particularly around, we've talked a lot about the issue of, it's a big age range that we're covering. And so how we can clarify how that might look different, a particular component may look different for an infant and toddler, for a preschooler, or for an early primary child and their family. Provide us with that information. Those will be happening, I think, very clear, very often within those supporting explanations. So we're going to move next to the next handout, or the next slide. I'm going to move to the first standard. I'm not going to read the standards to you. There's lots of places you can get access to the standards. One, you have a copy, or you can obtain a copy in the materials of this, the materials section of this webinar. You can obtain a copy of this PowerPoint. So the standards and their components are on there. You can go to the link for the survey, and the standards are provided there before you even start into the survey. And then the standards and their components are also provided within the survey itself. So all of those are ways in which you can take a look at the standards. So I'm not going to read them to you, but I will highlight pieces of them. So here's the first standard, and actually before I do the highlighting, let me just give you a quick 101 on how these standards and their components are formatted. So the first thing that we have is we have the name. So standard 1, the name is Child Development and Early Learning. Then what you have is a paragraph, hopefully a short, succinct paragraph. That's what we were striving for. That is actually the standard. So that paragraph right underneath the title is the standard. And then what you have, the numbered items directly below that, the 1, 2, 3, 4 in this case, are the components. And then, which is not now on the slide and is not yet available, what will come underneath that will be the supporting explanations. And the supporting explanations will literally be one for each of those components that you see listed there. So component number 1 under standard number 1 will have a supporting explanation, and 1.2 will have a supporting explanation, etc. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of sense of how we have formatted these standards, and again, help you in terms of how to work through it. So child development and early learning. So basically what we're focusing on here is an understanding of the impact of the different theories and philosophies of early learning and development, that our candidates can apply knowledge of individual differences, exceptionalities, normative variations within developmental domains, and a variety of other components of what we know about child development and learning as they design meaningful experiences and individualize instruction. And really importantly to all of us in DEC is that they know how to provide that those learning experiences and individualization of interventions and instructions within natural and inclusive environments. Partnering with families. One of the things I want to say just at the front end of partnering with families is that we as a task force decided very early on that while many of our other areas, early childhood education personnel standards, our special education standards, don't have a standalone standard for families, we felt like we needed a standard while we needed a standard that was specifically about partnering with families. While families appears across the standards, we again felt very strongly that working together with families in early intervention, early childhood special education is such a cornerstone that we needed it as its own standard. So partnering with families is standard number 2. And important concepts we wanted to include in this standard is that our candidates can apply family capacity building practices as they support families to make informed decisions. that their work really looks at how to engage families in opportunities that strengthen families and parent competence and confidence, and support their abilities to support their children's development and learning. Again, this real strong emphasis on working with parents in partnership and developing trusting, respectful, responsive partnerships with families. Collaboration and teaming. Yet again, one of those areas that we know is absolutely central in ECSE. Here, we really wanted to make sure that our candidates know and are able to apply models, skills, and processes of teaming when collaborating and communicating with families and other professionals, using culturally and linguistic responsive practices. In partnership with families and other professionals, we want to ensure that our candidates can plan and implement transitions that occur across the age span. We felt it was really important that within one of our standards, the issue of transitions, which is such a continual process within those birth to 8 years of age, as children and families transition from one service model to another service, or to a particular program to another program. We felt it was really important that our practitioners understand how to effectively implement those transitions to support the success of the children and their families as they move through those transitions. We also want to make sure that they have a variety of collaborative strategies that they use as they work together with as I like to say, as they work and play well together with other adults. Assessment, again, an important area of work for any early interventionist, early childhood special educator. We wanted to make sure that all of our candidates know the purposes of assessment, that they know how to develop or select and administer informal assessments as well as formal assessments, and that they use evidence-based processes and approaches in partnership with families and other professionals as they conduct these assessments, and that they know how to analyze, interpret, and document and share strength-based assessment information with families and other professionals in order to develop goals, plan instruction and intervention, and to implement ongoing progress monitoring and reporting of that progress monitoring. Okay, number 5, curriculum. We again felt very strongly that our candidates needed to have an understanding of early childhood curriculum and frameworks, across developmental and academic domains. They need to know how to plan and create universally designed, inclusive, and natural learning environments that provide each child and their family with equitable access to high-quality learning experiences. We want them to be able to identify and modify curricula to provide each child with learning opportunities that meet rigorous early learning standards or learning standards. Sorry, I put my bias in there. Number 6. This is a long one. It was a hard one to get all of what was important in here, but it focuses on interaction, intervention, and instruction. The work of an early interventionist, early childhood special educator really must be about knowing how to plan and implement intentional and systematic, evidence-based, and responsive interventions to support children's learning and development. They must be able to methodically promote children's social emotional competence and proactively address challenging behaviors through the use of function-based interventions. They should be able to facilitate equitable access and participation for all children within natural environments and inclusive settings. Finally, we want to make sure that they are using data-based decisions for making use data-based decision-making to plan for and continually modify and improve interactions, interventions, and instructions. And then the final one, our number 7, is we of course want our candidates to understand important concepts around professionalism and ethical practice. And I would just highlight the last couple of phrases here. We want them to exhibit professional dispositions, engage and understand how to engage in advocacy and leadership skills while adhering to ethical and legal guidelines. We want to be sure that they research and evidence-based practices are promoted and used by each and every one of our candidates. So those are our 7 standards and competencies as they are currently in first draft form. Now we need your feedback. We need your feedback through the survey that's currently open. Closes on February the 8th. I've seen, as I've kind of glanced a couple of times at the chat box, folks wanting to know, how do I get to it? Where's the survey? Both of these links will get you there. So again, these links are in the PowerPoint PDF that is in your material section. The other thing that you can do is go to, if you don't have that, go to CEC's website, put in ECSE, which hopefully you've heard me say enough now that you won't forget it, standards, and it will then take you to the page where those draft standards, one, you can look at the draft standards, and then there's also the link then to the survey. So multiple ways. We want to make it as easy as possible. And you know, if all that fails and you can't get it, you can email me, you can email the DEC office, and they will be happy to send you that information as well. So next steps, we will be providing, we've been invited to share the draft standards and the components, and most likely some of the supporting explanations at NAEYC's Professional Learning Institute. Is that what the L stands for? Somebody can correct me. if you know it, put it in the chat box, in June in Long Beach, California. So it'll be an opportunity for us to get further input, feedback, information. And then, of course, at DEC's conference, which I'm sure every one of you knows when that is, please join us in Dallas and give us more feedback, give us more information. We'll let you know where we are, what we've done at that point, and we'll continue to get feedback from you on the process. In addition, look for, as I mentioned already, supporting explanations to roll out at one point for us to get feedback from you. In addition, we will be developing guidance for programs and reviewers. That's to come a little bit later, but definitely work we have to do before 2020. And assessment evidence guidelines and rubrics. So how guidelines for programs in terms of how you might go about assessing for competence of your candidates. So again, more information, again, the CEC, ECSE standards web link is a great place. You can get a full draft of the standards and their components there, as well as link to the survey. And that's all I have to say. But please stay connected with us. Stay tuned, stay connected. And again, can't thank you enough for all of the information that you, all the interest, support that you've already shown us. And I know the great information we're going to be getting from you. So Peggy, I'm not sure if you wanted make some comments about the chat box.
Yeah, hello everyone. I believe we answered all of the questions, but we do have some additional time. If there's any questions you have not entered into the chat yet, please do so. And also you can add those to the survey as well. So I just want to add to Eva to say thank you very much for your time, your excitement. Please share this information with colleagues, both on the CEC and the DEC website. There is a form that anyone can fill out, even if they were not at the live webinars, to receive the recording and a chance to fill out the survey as well. So please help us get the word out and take advantage of continued opportunities.